All right, Doug. Good to see you this morning. I wanted to talk to you about the biggest thing happening in the news, which is the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and this new opening that's on the Supreme Court now. And I want to know like what your thoughts on it are. And I've heard you say before it didn't really even matter. The Supreme Court didn't actually even matter, and I just wonder if you still feel the same way about it.
Yeah, well, I guess to start with, uh, she was an opera fan, and my stepmother is the life chairman of the Washington Opera. So I often went to the opera
Mm.
for that reason, the National Opera, and it's full of these high government officials. So one evening, we had dinner with Ruth and her husband. And I sat next to her husband and we talked. Charming guy, nice guy. And as I'm prone to do after 5 minutes on the weather, the state of the roads, and yesterday's baseball game or whatever it was. Of course, opera's during the winter, so they weren't playing baseball, but whatever it was. So I like to talk about philosophy, and he was very pleasant company. We didn't get into an argument. I never get into arguments anyway because it's pointless. So anyway, that was one thing. And oddly enough, years before, and I don't know what the occasion was, I was there. I was present for her ordination. Well, that's not correct. Although a Supreme Court justice is almost like being ordained as a priest, kind of, or priestess. So I was there for that too. Rather odd confluence of accidental events. Okay, so with that preface, it actually, Supreme Court, who's on the Supreme Court actually is quite important for the same reason as, what Stalin said about voting. Who votes doesn't matter. What matters is who counts the votes. And the same can be said about laws. What the law says doesn't matter. It's who interprets the law that counts. So that's why the Supreme Court is quite important. And the question is, what should the Supreme Court do? Now, and of course, all these Supreme Court justices have their own little hobby horse that they like to ride. And hers was being a woman. It was all about being a woman. Now, it's a huge mistake. It means it's identity politics is what it is. Because of how I was born as an accident of birth, therefore, everything relates to this accident of birth, which is just the opposite of the way it should be. So that's what she was all about. And we can, so why is it such a big deal that she died? Well, I guess the last one that died, was that Scalia? Was the last one?
Yep.
Okay, well, all right, big deal too. But should it be? Look, it's the question is, how should the Constitution be interpreted? And incidentally, I've got to say that as a document, the Constitution is okay. It basically says, the Constitution itself basically says how the government is to be run. And that's fine. I guess you need some kind of rules of order when you're going to have a government and how it's to be run. But point number one, the whole Constitution is in fact a dead letter today because it's been interpreted out of existence over the last 200 years, mainly by Supreme Court decisions. So it's just a shadow of what it should be, number one. And number two, the most important part of the Constitution by far is not the basic document, which says how the government's to be run, but it's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which say basically what the government can't do to the people. So that's why the Supreme Court is important, figuring out, the nitty gritty and the practical application of these things.
Do you think that her, RBG's whole hobby horse of, from the lens of a woman is like, do you think it was because she was sort of heralded as this symbol of this, of women's liberation, like that she was seen as this, glass ceiling breaker, even though she wasn't the first woman on the Supreme Court? But I mean, is it just because like, you think she ends up just assuming this heralded identity, and can't help but drop it? Where does it come from?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, maybe she felt, I don't know if this is the fact, but maybe she felt rather sheepish about being, in effect, an affirmative action hire. If she hadn't been born a female, would she have wound up on the Supreme Court? Well, odds are against it, just statistically. So this whole idea of making the composition of the Supreme Court diverse, the way you do that, it's basically affirmative action hiring. And, we have to recognize that just because these people are on the Supreme Court, that doesn't make them especially wise or anything, or make them saints. It just makes them politically well connected, because if you're a Supreme Court judge, you're a government employee. And when you're employed by somebody, whether it's a government or a company or a person, basically you dance to the tune of your employer. That's why you're employed by them. And if you hate the institution, you wouldn't be working for it. Let's admit it. I mean, I couldn't work for the government because I have certain attitudes towards legalized coercion and force. So, okay, so she was a well-educated and thoughtful government employee, but her whole thing, at least the way I see it, and I could stand to be corrected because I haven't studied her record. I mean, there have been 140 Supreme Court justices or something like that since the founding of the country. I don't want to study the records and thoughts of all of them because they're basically just political appointees.
Right.
So who cares, essentially?
Yeah,
but her whole thing was women's rights, one way or another. And that is a real can of worms.
Well, and I think, and then because of this identity politics era we live in, even Trump immediately comes out and says, I've determined that whoever it is I appoint or nominate will be a woman. So it's again, right along those lines. And, I'm sure there are incredibly qualified women, just like there are incredibly qualified men. So the idea of things, the identity politics sphere seems like it's a mistake.
Oh, huge mistake. I mean, before you know, if they got to have a Jew on the court, got to have a Protestant on the court, got to have a Catholic on the court, soon we're going to have a Mohammedan on the court, maybe a Zarathustrian, maybe a Rosicrucian. Well, why not a pagan? Why not an atheist? I mean, where do you stop with this?
Yeah, you got to throw in a Satanist too. I mean, really, it's just totally unreasonable.
Hey, fair is fair. Come on.
Exactly.
The qualification for becoming a Supreme Court justice, should be wisdom. Now we got to talk about that too, I suppose. Yeah. But here's the thing: it's how do you interpret the Constitution? And there are basically two schools of thought. One of them is that it says what it says, and it should be interpreted utterly strictly, because at least the Bill of Rights is there to defend the common man against, legalized and institutionalized force.
Yep.
And in a civil society, you should limit the use of coercion and force as much as possible. I mean, that's the difference between a barbaric tribe in the jungle and a civilized society. It's that, force is limited. Okay, so that's what the Bill of Rights is all about. But then there's another school of thought which says, well, the Bill of Rights is all well and good, but things have changed over the last couple hundred years. And the Constitution should be a living document. And that sounds good. A living document. We all like living stuff. You don't want a dead, musty document live your life according to. So this is actually just rhetoric. What it really means is that you can do whatever you want, because if you interpret the Constitution, very liberally, you can do whatever you want. That's what a living document it is. You feel like this today, you can do that. That's absolutely at odds with the whole idea of a Bill of Rights, because moral principles per se don't change. Mm-hmm. Now, getting back to Ruth and her thing about being a woman is the biggest thing in the world. So I guess abortion is like number one on the agenda.
Yep.
If you're really into being a woman. And on that, I've got to say, well, first of all, the Constitution doesn't say anything about abortion. And you've got to look to the 9th and 10th Amendments, which are the two biggest dead letters in the Bill of Rights. Nobody even knows they exist. And there are only 3 crimes listed in the Constitution. They're treason, counterfeiting, and piracy. No other federal crimes are listed. Well, of course, since then, there are now, I guess, about 5,000 federal crimes. So these are all totally unconstitutional. That's something for the states to do, like murder, okay? That's not against the US Constitution. That's for state jurisprudence to decide. That's the way it was set up. But it's not that way anymore. So abortion, well, my take on it is, first of all, since abortion or murder, if you feel that way about it, is not a federal crime, it should have nothing to do with the federal government getting involved in it. It's something the state should have to do with, if they want to or if they don't want to. At least that's the way it's set up in the US.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I think, I do believe that people, the rhetoric around it, people really think that if Roe versus Wade was overturned, then, a woman's right to choose would be just completely eliminated. Like that that is the only, that the last bastion of women's reproductive rights is Roe versus Wade, rather than the fact that each state would have its own laws around it. Right? I mean,
yeah. Well, exactly. And if somebody wants an abortion and the state that they're in is ruled against it because it's against the mores and culture or whatever of that particular state, well, that's fine. Go next door to the next state and get it done. It's a question. Look, like most things that are moral judgments, you have to live with yourself. And in the long run, break a law, don't break a law. I mean, these things are of passing consequence. But whatever you do, you've got to live with it yourself. So you've got to decide, okay, I've got this baby. I don't particularly want it. So what am I going to do? Well, you can abort, or you can carry through with it. Now, my own personal view is more classical. You'll recall that the Greeks and the Romans, who are really the founders of Western civilization and our civilization, even here in America, it's why all the buildings look like they're Greek or Roman in Washington. If you didn't like the looks of the baby, if it was deformed or any number of things could be wrong with it. It was it was not only legal, but it was expected that you'd put it out, expose it on a hillside, and that's the end of the problem. I mean, you don't have an obligation. And of course, another argument you can make is that, look, that baby is a parasite in the mother's body. So it's mother's choice whether you want to have that, what's a parasite, human parasite, continue to grow, or you want to evict it. Anyway, it's up to the mother. I mean, yeah. So I'm absolutely, I don't want to, this is not between the mother and the state. This is between the mother and her conscience, and she has got to live with it. So why is this a big deal? Why is the state involved in this is the question I ask.
Especially at the federal level. And, it just seems to me that this is, I always felt like this is, one of those political wedge issues that's just designed to mobilize voter turnout, and that the politicians, like, they love it that this is at, the Supreme Court level, because then they can always justify, the politicians can always justify why it's so important that people come to the polls, but never actually, the politicians themselves never do anything about any of it. You know what I mean? They can always have it, like, it's up to the Supreme Court to decide, how these things are going to go, and we're going to fight for it, but vote for us. And it just seems like a political wedge issue. But no matter what, we know, because of what you were saying about the three basic crimes that are in the Constitution, this should not be decided at the Supreme Court level anyway. So that's all, I think that's the big thing. Maybe at the state level it would be okay.
So much of this boils down to a matter of opinion, or a matter of the arbitrary upbringing of the person in question, whether they're a Supreme Court judge or a mother with the baby. It's what they were told. They never think of any possible, actual, independent morality on this. It's basically, the way I was brought up, or what happened to me when I was a kid, or something like that. It doesn't seem like a proper way to think when you're making laws that can affect millions of people.
No, and I will go back though, but you said that this was, you said that it is really important because the interpretation of the law is what really matters. And so the Supreme Court appointment, this appointment seems like it is really important. And if nothing else, the political factions are acting as though it's like a world-ending kind of a situation, like that they. On the Democratic side, it must be stopped at all costs. I mean, they say, Chuck Schumer and people like that saying that nothing will be taken off the table if the Senate votes on this. And it seems like almost even threats of violence are associated with this. So I'm just curious how you see it playing out over the next, 50 days or whatever it is before the election.
Well, it's a sign, one of the many signs that the culture of the U.S., where people share traditions, they share a general way of looking at things, they're more or less in agreement in worldview, is disintegrating right before our very eyes. And that's certainly true among the people that are in Congress, because the people that are in Congress or in government generally are not our best and brightest and wisest and so forth. What they are is they're generally the worst kind of people. They're people that go to Washington, want to be elected, are people that want to control other people, that want to make laws telling other people what to do. They're the worst kind of people, okay? And of course, now they're fighting about each other as to who gets to control the cookie jar that they all want to steal from, and money and power. So what's going to happen, I think, is, let's suppose that Trump appoints somebody and he's confirmed in the next 40 whatever days it is until the election. Well, several things can happen. If the Democrats win the election, and if Biden wins, they'll control the Senate too. So they'll impeach Trump, and who knows where that'll end. And they'll probably pack the Supreme Court, something that Roosevelt tried to do also, so that you just fill the Supreme Court up with people that you know the way they're going to vote. Nothing to do with wisdom or prudence or the Constitution. They'll just vote to not overturn laws that you like. So that's what's going to happen. And there's no limit in the Constitution, I don't think, to the number of people that are on the Supreme Court. So you could have 50, you could have 100, so you can have proper diversity on it. I mean, it can be mass chaos. So it's very look, I don't believe in the court system the way it's constituted anyway. So a lot of this is, to me, angels dancing on the head of a pin, since I don't believe in the way jurisprudence is dispensed anyway.
But you think it's if that happens and we get this sort of kind of tit for tat response between Republicans and Democrats, Trump appoints somebody, which he's obviously constitutionally eligible to do, and the Senate confirms them, which they are, that's one of their roles in the Constitution is to do that. Then you expect that the Democrats come back with using whatever constitutional tools they have, essentially, from packing the court to impeachment, to try and I guess get retribution for it. If that happens, that seems like that's the nuclear option, and it's all over.
Yeah, it's actually chaos in Washington at that point. And the fact that Ginsburg's big thing was anti-discrimination, mainly against women. That's not something that's even in the Constitution. I mean, yes, everybody should be treated equally before the law, but that's when dealing with the government. It has absolutely zero to do with hiring or not hiring somebody because they're a woman or black or gay or you name it, anything. There's 1,000 different reasons why you might want to discriminate against somebody that you hire, or discriminate against somebody that wants to move in your housing development or anything. It doesn't have to be just black, woman, gay. There's 1,000 reasons. And that's another thing that makes for a civilized society. I mean, look, if you don't discriminate, you are undiscriminating. Maybe you shouldn't be able to discriminate against people that have horrible personal habits. Anyway, it's not for the government to decide. In a civil society, this is for people to decide between themselves. So all these discrimination laws that are granting special rights, in effect, to various classes of people, all these laws should be abolished. The government has nothing to do with that. The government is only there to protect you from force and violence. And the court system is only there to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force and violence. It's not there to do everything else that it's trying to do today. So right. I just have to add that in there as context.
It reminds me of just the way you describe like the misuse of that institution. It just reminds me of the use of the military, because I was in the Army, and my experience in the Army was that we had a particular set of expertise in killing people and breaking things. And then, it became this idea of using the military to win the hearts and minds, of indigenous populations or whatever, in Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth. And it just seems like that's just a job that there was no chance that the military could really succeed at, because it's just the weapons of war just they can't even be used to paint schools. You can't use howitzers to paint schools. It doesn't work. So, and it seems like the court system seems like a reasonable, do you think that comparison is apt? Basically, it's just the wrong tool for the job?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea of the military winning hearts and minds, it's ridiculous. I mean, what are the chances of testosterone-charged, heavily armed teenagers that have been indoctrinated with kill the enemy winning hearts and minds? I mean, that's a long shot.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really hard once you kill someone's uncle, that that they have a positive attitude toward you and are really interested in, being cooperative. And these kinds of things accidentally happen. I mean, unintentional deaths in war, but in any case, so if this nuclear option happens, where you get into this tit for tat um, destruction of probably, I think, other than the military, I would assume that the Supreme Court is probably, I'm just guessing, I wonder what you thought of this is probably second most um, perceived legitimate institution in America. I mean, the military seems number one still, but it seems like the Supreme Court, people just kind of accept what, even when they don't like the decision, they just kind of go with it. Like, okay, we're all going to accept it. But if you're going to totally undermine the legitimacy of the courts, then, I mean, it seems like the only thing left is military.
You're right. And the legitimacy of the military, which I totally agree with you, it's the most respected institution in the US. It's also being undermined. And also, I've got to say, my guess is that for the 2024 election, either of these parties, or both of them, assuming they still exist, and we don't have two major split-off parties, one from each, I think they're going to put up a general just because the military is so well respected. But the Supreme Court, they're basically government employees that happen to have a background in U.S. laws. And no, but you're quite correct. But it's all falling apart at this point. And the COVID lockdown, the hysteria resulting from COVID, is a major transitional event. It's as big as the assassination of JFK as far as acting as a catalyst, changing the way the society is. And I don't know what it's going to look like after it comes out the other side. In fact, nobody thought when Kennedy was assassinated, it would act as the catalyst for a whole different thing with the 60s. So I don't know what's going to come, but I don't think it's going to be very good from the point of view of somebody that likes personal freedom. I think it's going to be really bad from that point of view. It would be good in other ways, but I can't see any at the moment.
Well, let me just ask you one last question about this. Just curious how you would handle it, assuming, which I know you would, if you were president yourself, if you were in Donald Trump's position, how would you handle this situation? Would you appoint somebody and try and push it through? Would you use it as an election tool to rally the base? I mean, how would you handle it?
Yeah, I think he's got to appoint somebody. First of all, I mean, as I think Ginsburg said this at some point, that the president's the president for the full 4 years. He's like not the non-president for his last year where he can't do things.
Right.
She may have changed her mind later, but that's what she said at one point, as I recall. So yeah, if I was Trump, I'd definitely try to get an acceptable to him justice, and hope that he's reelected and that he controls the Senate. Because if he doesn't control the Senate, the Democrats are going to impeach him again, and that's going to create. I mean, you're almost like asking for a civil war in this country, because if the Democrats are elected, they want to change so many things, and they want to cement themselves in office, not just by packing the Supreme Court, but by making Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. states, so they get 4 more senators in perpetuity. And yeah, this is really, really serious. So Trump wants to try to do this. I guess he's thinking to try to turn things around in 4 years. But that's like figuring if you're the Roman emperor in the year 350, can you turn around the collapse of civilization in 4 years? No, these things have a life of their own. So it's fairly hopeless, I think. But I'd like to see the status quo, which is arguably kind of kind of peaceful and business as usual.
Yep.
I'd like that to be continued for another 4 years if possible. It beats, mass chaos.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think but I also think that there's always these pent up trends, right? So if Trump is reelected, then that pressure on the left is just going to, it's not going to go away.
No.
It's just going to increase, and then perhaps the person that you get elected could be a lot worse than who would be elected now. And maybe it is this leftist general, or someone like that, that promises law and order and the fair distribution of goods. You get a Chavez situation or something like that.
No, you're absolutely right. The culture in the U.S. has changed, where people no longer respect the principles, which are actually rather unique, on which the U.S. was founded. So it's bound to be turbulent as they change, and we're talking half of the population. So the best we can hope for is you just keep people from looting and burning and rioting, which is destructive and inconvenient, for another 4 years. I mean, you can keep the lid on the pressure cooker for another 4 years. I guess I'll take that, because that's about the best we can hope for at this point. That's the best we can hope for. Just keeping the lid on the pressure cooker, as opposed to blow up.
I think you're right. All right. Well, we'll stop it there on that happy note, and we'll pick up the conversation tomorrow.
Okay, great, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Doug.